a man, who they say he murdered 3. Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Coffee keeps werewolves away. Unfortunately, in order to use it to its full effect, you have to throw the coffee on the werewolf while it's still hot. What a horrible thing to do to a cup of coffee. It also works on vampires. My coffee comes from the Organic Man coffee trike because I like myself and I refuse to drink substandard coffee. Only the best coffee in the universe will do. 4501 McPherson or organicmancoffeetrike.shop for the rest of y'all. A coffee, it's not just a drink, it's a life-saving libation. Ghosts and spirits are everywhere. We don't know why. We don't know why they show up in one place, not another. Why some places will be haunted and others will not be haunted. It's one of those things. It's a mystery. The only way to ever know why or how or when a ghost is going to show up in a place is to sit down and ask them. That would make for an interesting TV show. Ghost interviews. I'll bet somebody out in Hollywood's already trying to come up with that one. Of course, the boys in the white lab coats, they try to avoid saying anything positive about ghosts. It's always got to be some explainable, rational solution. Ghosts of people that were killed in battle or died from natural causes or even from unnatural causes, I can kind of accept that. I can handle ghosts even though I don't understand what they are or what they're doing. Ghosts of little kids, kids like Annabelle Lee, the creepy little girl from Trailer Trash Terrors, are an unknown being that I find hard to comprehend. Why would a young person be trapped or want to hang around in a world that they cannot interact with? Some ghosts can move furniture and they can make noises or even maybe scratch a person. Some kind of a contact with the living. Why linger on after death when there's either heaven to go to or the next life? I do believe in reincarnation. There are too many accounts of kids knowing things from their past lives to ignore it. The boys in the white lab coats get all kinds of flustered trying to explain away these occurrences. Are these ghost children here because it's fun? Or they don't want to move on? Or just maybe they're not what they appear to be? A radiant boy is a glowing ghost of a boy who was murdered by his mother and whose appearance portends ill luck or a violent death. Radiant boys appear in the folklore of England and Europe, originating with the Kindermorderen. The what, you might ask? Children murdered by their mothers from Germanic folklore. There are numerous Radiant Boy stories in Cumberland area of England, which was settled by Germanic and Scandinavian people in the 9th and 10th centuries. A Radiant Boy once haunted the Howard family's Corby Castle in Cumberland, making it the most famous appearance in 1803. The castle stands on a piece of land that was formerly occupied by a Roman fortification. Part of the old house is connected to a Roman tower. Written down in 1824, The radiant boy haunted a room in part of the old house that adjoined the tower. He plagued many overnight guests with his appearances and the noises that he made. The room always had an air of gloom, which Howard tried to dispel by changing the furniture and painting the walls. Howard recorded in his journal an incident taking place September 8th, 1803, involving the rector of Greystoke, who, along with his wife, was among the guests staying overnight at the castle. The rector and his wife had planned to stay for several days, but after the first night, they announced they were leaving. The Howards were stunned. Sometime later, the rector told Howard why they only stayed the one night. Between 1 and 2 in the morning, something woke him up. He looked around the room, trying to see what had interrupted his rest. The room was very dark. However, there was something glowing in the room. As he watched, this glowing thing became a flame in the middle of the floor. The rector thought the house was on fire, but the flames were all contained to one spot in the middle of the room. The flame was coming from a boy who stood there as if nothing odd was going on. His clothing was all bright white, and his hair was golden. The rector could only lay there staring at this glowing figure in the shape of a young child. It looked back at him with what looked to be a benevolent expression. After several minutes, the boy began to glide away in the direction of the fireplace. He vanished into the wall. The clergyman went on to tell this story to several people over the next 20 years, always swearing it to be the absolute truth. In the study, a room also called the ghost room, Robert Stewart, aka Lord Castlereagh, a second Marquis of Londonderry, saw a radiant boy before he committed suicide. Captain Stewart was posted to Ireland. One day he went out hunting and he got himself quite thoroughly lost. As darkness was coming on, he managed to locate a country home. Knocking at the door, the captain was invited in and given food and offered a room for the night. Stewart was invited to join the owner and his guests on their hunt the next morning. His whole reason for being there was he was trying to hunt, so he agreed. The captain was shown to his room for the night. Nothing special, since all the other guests had gotten there first, and therefore they had all gotten the better rooms. Stewart was too tired to worry about how the room looked. He plumb into bed and was asleep in seconds. In the middle of the night, something woke him. Stewart looked around the room, suddenly realizing there was a fire on the floor next to the bed. Before he could jump out of bed, he saw in the flames was a young boy, Sinropa. He was quite thoroughly naked. Stewart could only lay there, staring at the boy who was looking back at him. What had looked like flames was more of a brilliant glow coming from the body. After a few minutes, the glowing boy faded from sight. The following morning, the captain announced that he needed to leave immediately. The host managed to pry the details out of Stewart. Once the radiant boy had been described, the host gave the butler a tongue lashing for putting Stewart in the boys' room. The butler protested, saying that he had lit a fire to keep him from coming out. The host explained to Stuart that according to a tradition in his family, whoever saw the radiant boy would first rise to great prosperity and power, and then suddenly die a violent death. Stuart was the second heir in line in his family, and so he was not concerned. Within a few years, Captain Stewart's older brother drowned in a boating accident. Stewart left the army and entered politics, rising quickly. He was influential in creating the Act of Union between England and Ireland in 1800. He served as a Secretary of War in 1805 and 1807, and as Foreign Secretary from 1812 on. Despite his successes, he was not well liked and he was pretty much hated by most people. In 1821, his father died, making him Lord Castlereagh, a second Marquis of Londonderry. 1822, Lord Castlereagh's fortunes abruptly began to dim. He suffered with gout, and the stress of his career began to take a heavy personal toll. He became paranoid and suspicious. He began acting very strangely. Folks around him thought just maybe he was losing his mind. The court ordered him to be confined to his country home, and any means of hurting himself was removed. August 12th, 1822, he managed to get a hold of a penknife and he slashed his own throat. Ever wonder why we call them pen knives? Back when writing was done using a quill, you needed a small, sharp knife to keep a point on it. After all, it's a feather. So everybody carried around a pen knife. Cannock Chase, often referred to simply as the Chase, is a mixed area of wilderness in the country of Staffordshire, England. Folks tell about the black-eyed child of Cannock Chase. One story of the black-eyed child began in the late 1970s when a couple reported they had encountered a strange girl with entirely black eyes while walking through the woods. According to legend, the black-eyed child appears suddenly and she will ask for help. Those who have encountered her have reported feeling a sense of overwhelming fear and unease, often before they even see her face. Those who have seen her say she was dressed in old-fashioned clothing and has completely black eyes, with no visible whites or iris. People have reported feeling as though they're being hypnotized or controlled by her. After encountering her, some have reported experiencing physical symptoms, such as nausea and headaches. Some eyewitnesses are sure the girl isn't of this world, as the way she moves is unlike any human. She simply floats from tree to tree. There is no known connection to what is known as black-eyed children here in the States. Black-eyed children are ghoulish-looking creatures who have been trying to gain entrance to homes and vehicles since 1996. Even though the first report written down was 1996, there may have been creatures with the same description that never graced the pages before. Maybe the witnesses all vanished. They usually appear at night, knocking on doors or windows and begging to be let inside. As far as we know, they are always rejected due to an aura of terror that clings to them. They're always seen in pairs, an older being that stands to one side as the younger looking creature does most of the talking. We don't know of any time that they were successful in gaining entrance because nobody's ever been around to tell the tale, should it have occurred. The children are very pale looking, with very light colored hair. They generally wear modern clothing, though a few witnesses have reported wearing them old fashioned clothing, like the Amish or the Mennonites. They might wear sunglasses, or they'll grow the bangs long to conceal their eyes. They can be male or female, ranging from 6 to 16 years of age. Usually, one child in the pair is several years older than the other. Before you see their eyes, you may mistake them for just ordinary kids. When you see their eyes, solid black without distinction between pupil, iris, and no whites, people realize that they are dealing with bizarre things that are best not invited in. A few witnesses have said that their eyes look like ragged holes, while others describe their eyes as shiny black orbs. The black eyed children radiate negative emotions like panic and dread. Their true purpose is far from being clear. Are they really evil beings? No witnesses have ever reported letting the children inside their homes. It's unclear exactly what these kids' intentions are. There was a report of one woman who left her car running with her kid in the back seat while she ran into the store. Once she was back behind the wheel, she discovered that her son had invited a black eyed child into the vehicle. There was only the one creature, and she somehow found the courage to grab her son and run back into the store. The black eyed child vanished before the clerk could come outside to have a look. Those who have encountered them in their front porch have all said that they felt driven to invite these children inside, while a feeling of absolute dread was washing over them at the exact same moment. This would suggest some kind of a psychic power being used in order to get their way. The children are usually quite polite, using words like please, sir, or ma'am, when they are talking. One or both have said things like, we're just children. We can't possibly hurt you. Or, please let us in. We're hungry. They usually leave without too much of a fuss if they're rejected. Witnesses have reported strange happenings around these children to suggest that they have incredible powers. Pets go nuts when these kids are around. Dogs and cats will run and hide instead of barking or growling. Witnesses have reported the children staring at each other as if some form of silent communications. They have also tracked some individuals from one town to the next, despite these people moving in secret, changing phone numbers, and using fake names. They are famous for their ability to manipulate emotions, inspiring fear, panic, and dread so strong that the witnesses say they began trembling and sweating. The children seem to have an electrical or radioactive field around them. Flickering lights and power outages are common when the children are around. One witness said she let the children just inside the door, and since she has suffered from nosebleeds and she's been diagnosed with advanced skin cancer, consistent with exposure to radioactivity. Some witnesses have reported that children could only say one or two phrases, such as, we need to use your telephone, or our parents are coming soon. They may also be stuck using old fashioned expressions like telegraph instead of telephone, and they sometimes make nonsense requests like asking for some ketchup to go with their apple. Other witnesses described the children as intelligent and responsive. For example, if you tell them they can't come inside to use your telephone, they might ask to come in and use the bathroom or to warm up. The black eyed children have been seen in broad daylight, but most reported sightings are at night. The first written report of black eyed children was 1996 when Brian Bethel, a reporter in Abilene, Texas, published a story about them in a paranormal mailing list. The legend caught on and became an internet success. Reports of black eyed children began popping up all over paranormal and horror fiction forums. Most stories are published anonymously, and none of them could be linked back to actual news or police reports. Would you file a police report if you had an encounter with a couple of black eyed kids? The cops would probably haul you away thinking you're nuts or drunk or high. Some guy tried to take credit for inventing the black eyed children. He said he was lingering around the visiting room at a jail, trying to interview prisoners and get their stories. It doesn't work that way. You have to have a visitation request put in before you're allowed inside. You have to tell which prisoner you want to visit with, and that prisoner has to agree to see you. You don't just walk in and see who might want to talk to you. When was the first encounter with these beings? We might never know. Somebody way back when heard a knock at his door, and the next day, maybe he was found dead from a heart attack, or he simply vanished without a trace. My favorite theory is the unseen beings from far away study us to see what really gets us terrified. They take on this form to do their own thing. Instead of tulpas, we're dealing with fear eaters. The original story goes that many years ago a young boy was fishing from a bridge on Clinton Road in West Milford, New Jersey. He is said to have bent down to retrieve a coin when he was hit by a vehicle that didn't bother to stop. In his bid for revenge, this ghost boy pushes people into the lake. The legend is if you get out of your car and you stand on the bridge, you'll see a quarter drop on the ground near your feet. If you bend down to pick it up, this boy will push you into the lake, either to punish you or maybe to save your life from being hit by a car. A couple of guys were out driving looking for scary things. One of them was telling the other about the boy on the bridge. The passenger rolled down his window and he flung a quarter. He flung a quarter onto the road. Later, they were passing back over the bridge and they stopped to have a look. Something about the size and the shape of a quarter smashed into the windshield and bounced off. The pair decided to leave immediately and never drive along that road again. I've heard of a few playgrounds that seem to be occupied by kids that no one can see. Ghost children are there having fun or scaring the pants off of people who see their activity without seeing them. Maple Hill Park is known as the Dead Children's Playground in Huntsville, Alabama, right next to Huntsville Historic Maple Hill Cemetery. What a great place to build a playground next to a graveyard. Now, keep in mind, many years ago, people used to go to cemeteries to have picnics and socialize, and sometimes even have family reunions that could include those no longer breathing. In some countries, the dead stay in the back bedroom for years until it's time to go dig a hole. It is also common to dig them back up and carry the deceased around town. Here in the US, we don't do things like that, as far as I know. Dead Children's Playground has all the things found at any playground: swings, slides, monkey bars, teeter tots, and ghosts. People have seen these swings going back and forth while unoccupied by the living. The folks at Fact or Faked did a bunch of tests at a playground in South America. They came to the conclusion that it was just the wind. The swings at the Alabama playground swing independently of each other. One will be all the way to the front, while the other one may be all the way to the back at the same time. Folks also see orbs drifting around the park. One or two say that they saw actual figures, translucent children moving about the rides, looking for something to do. The playground is surrounded on three sides by limestone that formed many of the caves in the area. Some researchers have made a connection between limestone and spirit activity. Many children who died in Huntsville during the 1918 Spanish flu are buried in that spot. Forgot to unplug the phone. One time somebody called and I answered the phone. I said, and this is back when I had the mixer, so the phone could be heard over the computer. And I said, thank you for calling Strange Things. Go ahead, you're on the air. The person on the other end was like, huh? I'm what? You're what? And then they hung up. Another time it was a friend of my wife trying to get a hold of her, and she was a bit surprised to find out that her voice was being recorded and transmitted. Now, I know it's not supposed to record people's voices like that, but hey, they're calling me. I'm not calling them. Okay, back to the limestone. Oh, no, back to the Spanish flu. A lot of the kids that died in the area were buried there at Maple Hill, which is adjacent to the playground. The spirits of those children come out after dark to run and play as they might have done in life. The 100-acre grounds, built in 1882, is home to both graveyards and playground that sit in the heart of the dead zone. The ghost children are often seen playing on the swings and laughing, as children will do. The Maple Hill Cemetery becomes even more haunted, pronounced by paranormal activity late at night. One of the local legends surrounding the ghosts stems from a tale of an unsolved mystery involving Huntsville children who were kidnapped and murdered. Their bodies were dumped at the cemetery. The folks doing a lot of the research are convinced if somebody dies of violent means, or if they have unfinished business, they will return from the grave. I don't hold with this belief because there are many sites where nobody died, as far as we know, sudden violent death or otherwise, yet there are numerous ghost sightings. There is also locations such as the trenches in Europe, where thousands of men died, many of whom were never properly buried. Yet, the paranormal investigators find few unexplainable actions pertaining to spirit activity in the area. Ghost children are one of the biggest mysteries when it comes to the paranormal. So you've got a bigger mystery inside of a mystery. Young children, living or dead, are typically strangers to bad, nasty, evil activity. They see the world through the eyes of Disney movies and not the Twilight Zone. Seeing ghosts acting like children makes folks believe that these kids are stuck here, unable or unwilling to pass on to the next place. The urge to help them is sometimes overpowering. Paranormal investigators from Alabama and the surrounding area travel to the playground, hoping to capture that one good video or EVP that will show the world that ghosts are real. They have caught wispy shapes moving about the grounds. EVPs have been caught of disembodied voices, sounding like young children actually enjoying themselves. They can hear laughter and giggling, singing. Somebody walking past the house, and M objects to their being alive. There's such a small dog. She sure has a big personality. And she'll just keep doing that for the next couple of minutes. Pets, you gotta love them. People hear giggling and singing. They've recorded it. They've caught EVPs, and they've actually heard the sound without using a recorder, what they call a live audio. The swings move as the children is slowly going back and forth like they're just resting in the swing. And other times it's a full swing forwards and backwards. On photographs, they have seen light trails behind the swing as it moves forwards or backwards. Photographs taken since the early 60s have shown mysterious children in the background whenever their parents have taken pictures of their kids at the park. Parents snapping pictures of their children often are surprised when they see children in the photograph that weren't there earlier. Sometimes they're full bodies and sometimes they're semi-transparent. That is a that is redundant. Semi-transparent. Sometimes they're transparent and sometimes they're fully there. Paranormal investigators working at the cemetery sometimes have gotten distracted by activity in the playground. The cemetery is haunted, but the playground seems to be infested. The person is long gone, but she's still barking. I guess the dogs next door are barking, so she's joining in. The city of Huntsville decided they were going to close the playground and use that land for more burials. To them, this was the correct thing to do. What's up with politicians thinking that they have all the answers? Most don't even know what the questions are. Most of our modern day troubles can be tracked back to political solutions from a few years ago. Good Lord, she's going completely nuts over there. You'd think I was being invaded by black eyed children or something. Maybe they are there, only she can see. Have you ever thought that? Why does a dog or a cat pay close attention to a spot where you can't see anything? Maybe I do have a couple of black eyed children on the driveway. The citizens were opposed to this plan. Protests immediately began taking place as soon as the city announced they were going to tear down the playground. The citizens said that instead the city should install new playground equipment and bring the playground back up to its original days. The folks at City Hall realized that these people were voters, so they changed their plans. During renovations, the workers noticed an increase in unexplained activity. Local ghost hunters were called to the scene to investigate things that the workers were seeing and hearing. While investigating, the group picked up EVPs of a voice of a young female child. The majority of the pictures taken during the installation of the new equipment showed unexplained fog, mist, and orbs, sometimes streaks of light that made no sense, seeing as it was a bright, sunny day. The installation of the new playthings not only made the ghost children activity more numerous, but people said that they were now seeing adult ghosts in the area as well. She got tired of barking. She came back to lay on the floor. A playground next to a cemetery is one thing. How about a playground built on top of an old cemetery? In New York, many old cemeteries were closed and the ground changed to public land. Play equipment was placed over the former homes of the dead. The claim was the bodies had all been removed, but nobody can say for sure that they actually got everybody, let alone even tried, or where the hundreds of disinterred folks went once they were dug up. Washington Square, Madison Square, and Bryant Park are all former cemeteries. Many parks were built on top of potter's fields, places that the poor and the indigent were buried. The folks in charge had little to no regard for the bodies of the folks who couldn't vote for them. Well, yes, many dead people do come out to vote during election time. I'm surprised that we never see polling places in cemeteries, seeing as so many of them seem to cast votes in every election. I think there maybe should be a law that says in order to vote you've got to be alive. Of course, then maybe the vampires would get mad at me. Undead. Central Park was built on top of several cemeteries. Seneca Village was a free black community that the city cleared away to build the first public park. Kids will see people standing or moving about as they play, never questioning whether these are living or dead people. About 8 miles west of downtown Orlando lies the ruins of Sunland Mental Hospital. The Sunland was originally a chain of hospitals spread across Florida, initially known as the W.T. Edwards Tuberculosis Hospital. Hospitals, there were several of them. The Florida government opened them in the 1950s to isolate and care for patients with tuberculosis. In the 1960s, tuberculosis became less of a public health issue as antibiotics strong enough to tackle the disease had been developed, making these hospitals no longer needed. The state converted them into mental institutions, and they were renamed the Sunland Training Centers. What training was to be had there is unknown. The government is the last entity on the planet that should be put in charge of our health care. But that's another story for another time. Just go visit a VA hospital sometime. Sunland Hospital facilities were located throughout Florida. The Orlando location was especially notorious. The Florida Department of Health took over the operations of the hospital, and they were transitioned into mental wards to care for children with physical and mental disabilities, thus beginning the dark ages of these facilities. Sunland Orlando was known for its horrid conditions, maltreatment of its patients, which even escalated into outright physical abuse and torture. The Sunland Training Center for Retarded Children was a hospital for adults and children who were severely mentally and physically disabled. This is kind of like naming some country the People's Republic of insert dictatorship here. Governments love to put names to things that are absolutely horrible in order to make them sound really nice, all designed to mask their true intent. In their 20-year existence, the hospital's conditions gradually degraded due to being understaffed and a lack of funding. The conditions fell into squalor. Rodents and pests bit both residents and staff, and roaches were everywhere. One patient with cerebral palsy said she would sometimes wake in the middle of the night to find rats in her bed. sometimes on top of her body. The food was inadequately prepared. Over 400 patients had been fitted with gastric feeding tubes through which they were fed a cereal like gruel 3 times a day. Rooms were crowded with up to 100 patients in a single ward. Sanitation practices were unhygienic at best, and even surgical areas weren't appropriately sterilized. Sunland was hell for both patients and staff. Many of the workers were shocked upon seeing the conditions in the hospital, but at the time there was not much they could do about it. One staff member even said that she couldn't sleep for 2 weeks after starting her job at Sunland, as the patient abuse left her traumatized. Time for another rant. I hear people say it all the time. Someone should do something about this, only to do nothing. Wake up, folks. That someone is you. You are that someone who needs to do something. If you see someone being attacked, don't just grab your cell phone and make a YouTube video out of it. Call the cops. Do something positive. Be a helpful person. Don't just be a part of the riffraff that is making our entire planet into a nightmare. If you know of a situation like at a hospital where the patients are not being treated correctly, or worse yet, a nursing home where a lot of bad things have been known to happen, report it. Consider it your duty. Consider it your job. Remember that Hippocratic oath, do no harm? Well, if you know harm is being done, you're a part of it. It's time to do something about things that we can do something about and stop being part of the problem. Eventually, the patients at the hospital/prison began to develop new and bizarre diseases that the folks in charge found hard, if not impossible, to treat. Their answer was to ignore anything they didn't want to address. Respiratory infections, skin diseases, urinary tract infections, and nutritional deficiencies all led to more patient abuse. The facility was understaffed and underpaid, contributing to the suffering of the patients. The folks who should have been paying the bills were focused on other things more important, such as things that the voters could see. The excuse for the poorly run operations at Sunland Hospital was not just simply a lack of funding, it was a lack of people giving a darn. The hospitals tried to make things somewhat nicer for the staff while simply ignoring the patients. Some of the more functional patients would be seen as members of the Boy and the Girl Scouts. They would slap a uniform on them and they'd take a bunch of photographs and say, look, some of our patients are out doing things. Well, they never actually left the hospital, but they sure did pretend that they did. By the 1970s, the horrific conditions at Sunland Prison became public knowledge. Somebody dropped a dime. Concerned staff had voiced their concerns. Somebody had finally done something. 1978, the Association for Retarded Citizens filed a class action lawsuit for gross neglect and abuse on behalf of the Sunland Hospital victims. They forced the hospital to close, which they did in 1983, ending an era of torture and abuse at the Florida state government's hands. People should not pretend that this never happened, because if you ignore the past, you're destined to relive it. The now defunct Sunland Hospital was abandoned and fell into disrepair. It became a hangout spot for kids and urban explorers that were looking for a scare. Visitors often heard screams and moans, some of them coming from children. They saw the shadows of former patients, including someone that seemed to be hung from the ceiling. Apparitions of young children have also been seen wandering around the grounds outside. 1997, a 23-year-old man fell into an elevator shaft, plunging to his death. When the sheriff's deputies arrived, they saw a young boy looking out one of the second-story windows. While searching for the boy, they could find no one. After the accident, residents and community members of the surrounding neighborhood lobbied to have the buildings torn down. It was demolished in 1998, leaving only the old administration building. The playground and a large field are all that are left of the Sunland Hospital. The playground has no historical markers or any signs stating what had been done there back in the 60s and 70s. At night, ghosts of children come out to play. And I have to say it, warriors come out to play. That was a weird movie. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you and I do not watch the same kinds of movies. Nighttime visitors have seen ghostly apparitions of children in and around the area. Swings have been seen moving on their own. Many of the children who died at Sunland were buried at the Greenwood Cemetery. Specifically, they were buried at Babyland, a section of the Greenwood Cemetery reserved for children and infants under 5 years of age. Many of the dead at Babyland had died on the same day they were born, which is why there are graves that have no names and only one date. The Greenwood Cemetery is considered a haunted hotspot in Orlando, being well known for ghost sightings. At Babyland, visitors have heard children laughing and playing, and some feel their pant legs being tugged as if a small child is trying to get their attention. Back when things were rotten, they had what was called lunatic asylums. They thought that the moon was actually affecting people's brains, which, if you've ever worked in a hospital, you'll know that it does, or in law enforcement for that matter. These places did not function as hospitals, they were more like prisons for the mentally challenged. Many held children as well as adults. Being understaffed and underfinanced, many of the children were kept in the same rooms as the adults. What could possibly go wrong? If a family had a problem child or they had more mouths to feed than they were able, they might just drop one or two of them off at the local asylum. This was a common thing. Some adults wound up in an insane asylum because their families thought that they were just a little too weird to be out in public. What would the neighbors say? George likes to walk around outside without his pants on. He should be locked up for that. Maybe he just liked the fresh air. Gladys was admitted to the asylum prison after having been raped. It turned out that she was now pregnant. She died while delivering a girl, who was then named Lily by the staff. None of Gladys's relatives came forward to claim her, so Lily wound up living at the facility. She didn't live very long. She contracted tuberculosis when she was 9. Lily haunts the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. She's not the only ghost there, but she's so well known, an entire room has been set up just for her in the eastern corner of Ward 4. It is fully stocked with toys for her to play with, and she does. There's a music box with a ballerina on top that sometimes plays on its own, and she will sometimes roll a ball back and forth with certain visitors. People like to visit Lily's room and bring her things like toys, stuffed animals, and candy. Many people state that the toys will sometimes move and that the candy will disappear. Many believe this is Lily's way of playing. Sometime in the past century, a two-story schoolhouse on the edge of Calgary, Alberta, caught fire, killing all inside. To this day, it is said the ghosts of those who died haunt the area. The place became known as the Devil's Playground, a famous southern Alberta legend that has fascinated ghost hunters and storytellers for years. The story goes in the turn of the 20th century, a schoolhouse on the edge of Calgary caught fire, killing the children who were trapped inside. The spirits of those children are still doing all sorts of creepy, haunting things. The first attempt to demolish the school resulted in all the workers getting sick and all of their equipment breaking down. The remains of the school are now on private land. People will still sneak out there to have an encounter of the frightening kind, especially around Halloween. I wonder if people are sneaking out there right now as I speak. One ghost many folks have seen or heard is a little girl who died in the fire. She is described as being a creepy little kid that likes to sneak up on people and scare them. To get to the remains of the building, people sneak past the owner's home. Once there, they walk around doing all the things that they see on ghost hunting TV shows. A pair of trespassing investigators snuck in the middle of the winter. The snow was about knee deep, higher in some places when the wind would blow. They stood in the dark building, listening for anything paranormal. The sound of someone walking through the snow came to them. They thought this was probably the property owner come to chase them off. The sound got closer, moving up to the front door. The crunching was followed by somebody walking into the building and down the hallway, coming their way. The investigators hid in one of the rooms and listened. The footsteps stopped right outside the room that they were in. When no angry voice called out to them, the pair peeked around the corner into the hall. There was nobody there. However, there were tiny footprints, like some kid had walked through the snow and into the hallway. Snow and water went from the front door right to the room that they were standing in. This was a little too creepy, and so the two ran for the front door. As they exited, they could see that the only footprints outside were their own as they walked to the building earlier that night. Speaking of creepy little girls, Annabelle Lee, the girl that sings the opening and closing song, can be heard by visiting Trailer Trash Terrors. On my show, she only sings. On Vic Hermanson's show, she sometimes comes on and makes all kinds of comments about things that he said. I heard Vic say he was going to give Annabelle her very own email address. That is going to be interesting and bizarre. Why they call that place in Alberta the Devil's Playground is beyond me. The owner said he wasn't the least bit afraid of the ghosts. He said it was the living, the folks looking for the ghosts, that bothered him. In Sandy Hook Bay and Port Manmouth section of Middleton is the Seabrook Wilson Homestead. Most people say it is the spy house. The folks who talk about the place like to call it the most haunted house in America. I've already gone over that one. How many stars shall we give this place? Let's see. The Spy House was built sometime around 1650, and it originally sat on a 300-acre plot of land along the Port Monmouth shoreline. The story goes, during the Revolutionary War, it was a tavern and a popular drinking spot for the British troops. Its owner at the time was an innkeeper named Thomas Seabrook, who was a patriot in the New Jersey militia. My listeners in Great Britain would call him a traitor. I guess the name is dependent on who wins the war. Freedom fighter, traitor, rebel, terrorist. It really depends on who wins and who tells the story. The spy house was built sometime around 16. I've already said that. Seabrook would welcome in the regular British soldiers, and then he would ply them with cheap drinks. Once they had consumed too much, they would get talkative. Alcohol lubricates the mouth, causing people to tell things that they should probably keep to themselves. No great secrets were to be gleaned from the common infantrymen, but sometimes officers would hold private gatherings in one of the back rooms, where similar activity was performed. Seabrook and his staff would listen in, acting as friendly servers, only interested in entertaining the troops. Many interesting utterances would be written down and passed on to the colonial forces. In the early 19th century, the house belonged to a local reverend named William V. Wilson and his wife, Martha. This is why the place is called the Seabrook Wilson Homestead. 1974, the building became a museum. It was at this time it started to be known as the Spy House. The ghost stories began to circulate about the Spy House and soon became the primary focus of the folks visiting. Visitors reported seeing ghostly apparitions, either while in the house or while looking through the windows from the outside. Paranormal investigations were conducted, often resulting in evidence of otherworldly activity. Articles were written by notable paranormal experts, some of which would dub the Spy House the most haunted house in America. I'll give it 2 stars for now. Soon the Spy House, as it was then most commonly known, stopped allowing public tours. This only further fueled the ghost hunters' beliefs that officials were trying to cover up the paranormal presence. During its closure, the Monmouth County Park Commission removed all the items once displayed at the house and stripped the interior to the bare timbers in an effort to restore the building to its original appearance back when Seabrook owned it. The new management seemed duty bound to chase folks away. People would be scheduled to have a tour, only to find the place locked up and nobody around. They would wait too long, only to wind up leaving without ever seeing the inside. One couple who had had enough were about to drive away when they spotted a 10 or 11-year-old boy watching them from the second floor window. They looked at him, he was looking at them. For a few minutes, wondering what this young kid was doing in a closed up and locked museum. He was dressed in 1700 style clothing. As they watched, he slowly backed away from the window. Just then, the curator drove up, finally realizing that they had an appointment, apologizing for being late. They told her that they had seen a young boy in the upstairs window. She said nobody is supposed to be inside. She opened the house and together they searched the place, but they found no one. People driving by at night will see either a young boy looking out the upstairs window, or they will see a rocking chair moving back and forth as if someone is sitting in it. Whoever called this place the most haunted house in America must have been watching a lot of nothing but Lifetime movies and had no idea what a haunted house actually looked like. I am downgrading it to 1 star. The first ghost story I ever heard once I arrived in Laredo was of the little girl at the mall. She was being seen in front of the Sears store. I even bought a book telling about her, but the story was only 1 page, and most of that was a photograph of the mall. At night, I would run by the mall and I would stop and I'd look in the windows trying to see if just maybe I could catch a glimpse of the little girl, but I never did. The sightings ranged from a little girl with a doll, or sometimes with a balloon. Sometimes she was crying as if waiting for somebody and scared. Other times she would just be sitting there staring off into space. The description of her was always the same, though: shoulder length brown hair, a white dress to just below the knees, shoes with buttons on them. They stopped making shoes with buttons in 1933. She is somewhere between 8 and 10 years old. When I was writing the book Fort McIntosh and the Paranormal, I heard so many stories about a little girl running around the college. I began to wonder if there might be some kind of a connection between the mall and the fort. If you don't ask, you'll never know. So I went to the mall. I walked to the front desk and I asked the young woman there if she could tell me anything about the little girl. The woman at the front desk called security. I wound up spending 2 days listening to security guards, cleaning staff, and folks who worked at the stores telling me about their encounters with the little girl. I began to ask around, and the more folks I talked to, the more stories I found in places with no connection to the mall whatsoever. People saw this same little girl at the arena. The arena has changed the names so many times, I don't know what to call it anymore. So now I simply call it the arena. The little girl has been seen at the health department on Cedar Street, several hotels, and a couple of schools. There are reports of her being seen at the theater, running up and down the aisles while movies were showing. The staff at a restaurant that we go to have seen her in the dining room early in the morning when they're opening up or late at night when they're shutting down. My wife caught sight of a little girl standing right behind me. As I was scooting my chair back, she said to be careful. There was a girl standing behind me. I looked, but I saw nothing. My wife was looking around, trying to see where she had gotten to. People working at other restaurants have seen a little girl in a white dress in the dining room, even when the place is closed at night. To make things even more confusing, people tell of seeing a little girl in a white dress all over the country. Ask yourself, are people really seeing the ghost of a young child all over the country, perhaps all over the planet? Or is this some unknown being trying to get us to drop our guard so it can do something that is probably going to be dangerous, if not deadly, for their own purposes? I look at ghost children like I look at aliens. They have to prove to me that they're not going to do anything nasty before I am going to trust them. Hope you enjoyed tonight's show. If you did, spread the word around. Tell other people they should be listening to Strange Things with Chris James. If you're listening on one of the many platforms and you think maybe possibly you want to hear all of my shows, my archives can be found at iHeartRadio in the podcast section, all 400 and something episodes. If you're on YouTube, you can find about 99.9% of my shows because every once in a while I've upset somebody and they've pulled one of my shows. Until next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things. And remember, Happy Halloween.
Are you coming to the tree where there's strung up a man who they say he murdered 3? Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.